Hi everybody, welcome back. My name is Lowry, this is Lowry Crafts, my corner of the internet. Today I thought I would talk you through my kind of ins and outs. I think I've called them less and more, but my ins and outs in terms of my knitting for 2026. I don't really make knitting goals, but I do like to sort of reflect on the previous year and think about what I want more of, what I want less of. I think I touched a little bit on this in my Everything I Made in 2025 video at the end, but I wanted to talk through my full thoughts now that I have them. I do realise that we are at the end of January. I think it is actually the 1st of February when I'm recording this. Let me check. Yeah, it is the 1st of February, so thank God we've made it through the longest month of the year. If you can hear purring, Chips is on my lap. I don't know if the microphone is picking it up or not, but she is very settled, so I'm going to try not to disturb her. I have got my journal, which I use for all sorts of things, but I also use it for knitting reflections, as well as just day reflections, collages, things like that. And I've written down some things that I want less of in 2026 and things that I want more of, thinking back to kind of how last year's knitting went and what I enjoyed and what I perhaps didn't enjoy or didn't get as much wear out of as I wanted to. So we'll start with the things that I want less of. And the first thing that I've written down is actually something that I want none of this year. I've put less test knitting. I only test knit usually a couple of times a year, and it's usually for the same designers, Knits for Days, DK, and WeMadeWardrobe. And I enjoy those processes. I've decided for this year that I don't want to do any test knitting, and the reason is that I just don't feel drawn to knit with such a strict deadline anymore. And now both of those designers are typically pretty flexible. The deadline for the test knit that I'm doing at the moment for Knits for Days DK, or that has passed, it was extended by a week. But I just don't think anymore that knitting a jumper with a kind of 6-week deadline particularly fits with my life anymore. I'm quite busy this year, I hope. I hope that I'm moving house soon. So I think I will have less time to test knit anyway, but I just don't want to feel rushed to knit towards a deadline. And I want to make sure that the things that I'm knitting are things that I'm particularly excited about and that I've had time to think about and reflect on, and not necessarily things that I've seen for the first time in a test knit call and kind of been inspired to test knit. Now, that doesn't mean the things that I test knit last year / into this year are things that I don't enjoy. In fact, the top that I test knit last year for WeMadeWardrobe, it was called the Alva top, was one of my top knits for last year. I just think as part of knitting more intentionally for this year, I want to do less test knits. I have so many things on my list that I want to knit that are patterns that have been released for much longer, for long periods of time, for years, and I could not possibly get through all of those in one year. So it's not like I'm limiting myself hugely. I also do feel a little bit, and I don't know if I really want to get into it, but I do feel a little bit like giving someone a 6-week deadline to test knit a long sleeved garment is just not appropriate, I don't think. When you consider that the people who are test knitting are typically people who are knitting for a hobby, right? They're not people who are knitting for a job. Occasionally it might be someone who does knitting or knitting content part-time, for sure. But I think a lot of test knitters are just people who work full-time jobs and have full-time lives and knit for fun, right? And for those people, I just don't think 6 weeks is necessarily feasible. Now, of course, when you apply to test knit, the deadlines are advertised, so you know what you're getting yourself into. But I think it's just a reflection that I've had on the test knitting process that I think should I were to ever release my own pattern, which is certainly not something on the cards at the moment, but should that ever happen, it's something that I would like to do a little bit differently, I think. So that's the first thing that I want less of this year. The second thing is kind of linked to wanting to knit more intentionally, and it is to avoid spontaneously casting on new to me patterns. So I like to be motivated somewhat by, you know, creativity and a bit of whimsy and what inspires me in the moment. But I also occasionally find that I will see a new to me pattern and I will be so inspired by it, by the look of it, whatever, that I decide I want to cast it on straight away. And that occasionally doesn't work out so well for me. I'm trying to think of an example. Like actually the Cumulus Blouse, which was unfortunately my least favourite knit from last year. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the pattern. Obviously that's a pattern that's been out for a very, very long time, the Cumulus Blouse by PetiteKnit. But when I decided to cast it on, it was a new to me pattern. So I had received the yarn. I intended to use it for something else. I had gauge swatched and just completely not met gauge. So I thought, well, I'll try and find something else that will meet gauge. And I came across a Cumulus Blouse. And I was like, great, it fits, perfect, I'm going to cast it on. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that pattern at all, but for my personal style, had I allowed myself to ruminate on it for a bit longer, I think I would have realised that I don't think that yarn was the best choice for the pattern. It was a 50% cotton, 50% superwash merino. It's by Filcolana, and I can't remember what it's called right now, but I will put it in the description. I think that pattern needs something a bit more woolly, perhaps a bit more fluffy. It is obviously designed as a blouse pattern. And I don't think that means you have to knit it as a blouse. It is kind of a jumper, isn't it, really? But I do think it needs a slightly fluffier expression. I also think as part of that, the yarn that I knit it in just showed up the I-cord in a way that I didn't particularly like. It made the I-cord look messy. And had I thought about it in any particular depth, I think, before I cast it on, I would have realised that I wouldn't have wanted all of those I-cord edgings, and maybe I would have made changes to the pattern. Maybe I would have decided not to cast it on at all. So this year, I want to make a real effort to cast on things that are not new to me patterns, that are things that have been on my radar for a while, things that I can see in my wardrobe that I've thought about with different items of clothing that I already wear, and that I feel more confident will definitely be things that will fit in. When you've had that time to ruminate on it, to just kind of, you know, think about a pattern, sometimes I cool off things that I was really passionate about, and sometimes my enthusiasm will die down because the kind of novelty that hits at the start's kind of past, but I will come to realise that it's still something that I want in my wardrobe. And I need to allow myself to get to that stage, I think, before I start casting new patterns on. So that's the next thing that I want less of. Less spontaneous cast-ons. The next thing that I want less of is pretty self-explanatory. It is less animal fibres in summer garments. Now, I think that this isn't like a hard no. I certainly think that animal fibres have some place in my summer garments, particularly longer sleeve things. I don't live in a particularly warm climate, but I do run particularly hot, and I think I just discovered last year that the things that I have made with plant fibres, I get so much more wear out of in the summer. Sandnes Garnlina was my highlight of last year in terms of yarn choices. I will absolutely be knitting more things with that this year. On the other hand, I do have one sleeveless summer top. It's the Cloud top, which I would like to knit again this year, but I have it at the moment. I knitted it in a 50% merino non-superwash and a 50% cotton yarn. and I just get less wear out of that because of the merino component. I run a bit warmer in that garment, and also you can't just shove it in the wash in the same way. It's not superwash treated. I don't particularly like superwash treated yarns. I've discovered that as well. However, the kind of plant fibre things, particularly things like Sanya's Garnlina or a cotton yarn, you can just shove them in the wash, and that makes it so much easier because no one wants to be hand washing summer tops over and over and over again. Or I don't anyway. I don't enjoy hand washing things. So this year, I'm going to avoid animal fibres in my summer garments. I'm going to stick to my good old plant fibres. And the last thing that I want less of this year is cropped bodies and sleeves. This is not something I have been doing intentionally, but I think sometimes I get to the end of a sleeve or a body and I get a bit fed up, particularly with the body. And sometimes with sleeves, I misjudge how much they're going to grow. I don't wear cropped garments in my wardrobe. I don't go out and buy cropped garments. I always buy full length things. So why would I be knitting things cropped? And it's not because I'm intentionally trying to crop them. It's just because I'm getting fed up too early on and cropping that garment. So at the moment, I've already started doing this. I'm making much more of an effort to just really make sure that the body and the sleeves are the right length for me. And the only way I've learnt this really is through trial and error, is through knitting things that are kind of bracelet length on me or not quite the full length that I want. But now that I've learnt that and I know kind of what sort of length I need to knit it to and which kind of yarns that I use on a regular basis grow lots and which don't grow at all, the knitting for olive heavy merino does not grow in length. If anything, I think it shrinks in length, which is really unhelpful. But all of that is now information that I have stored up here. And I can use that to make sure that I'm knitting things that are exactly the way that I want them. So when it comes to the things that I want more of in 2026, the first thing on my list is knitting slightly ahead of season. Now, this is not something that I want to do really strictly because I don't want to be knitting heavy wool jumpers in summer, for example, and I'm not a designer, but I found last year that I was almost panic knitting my summer garments a little bit so that I could get some wear out of them before the warm weather came to an end. And I think my knitting experience would be significantly improved if I was just slightly ahead of season and I didn't feel, again, that kind of pressure to meet a deadline. Now, obviously, I'm still going to be knitting summer garments in summer because I don't want to be working with heavy wool fibres. But I think for my own experience, I would be more likely to enjoy the knitting process if I didn't feel like I had a deadline on it. I also think I am a little bit of a project knitter. I obviously enjoy the process, that's why we do it. But I am a bit of a project knitter. I enjoy fashion and I enjoy putting outfits together and things like that. So I think for the whole experience, sort of from conception and casting on and identifying a pattern and picking a yarn all the way through to styling that finished piece, it would just be much more enjoyable if I wasn't kind of rushing to finish things. So I would like to be slightly ahead of season this year, but I'm not going to put too much pressure on that. The next thing that I have put on my list that I will make sure that I do is that I want to do more modifications to patterns so that I can create my ideal garment. I sometimes am guilty of just following a pattern as written, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes I just need to switch my brain off a little bit. But I think I have the skills that I need to modify garments to make them exactly what I want, whether that is to substitute in a different kind of ribbing, whether it is to do a double knit button band rather than a ribbed button band, whether it is to change the cast off or the edge, whether it is to increase the armhole depth, like whatever it is. I think that is something that I have the skill set to do, and therefore I would like to do it for the sake of the longevity of the things that I make, and their kind of place in my wardrobe and the sustainability of that side of the craft. I would like to make sure that I am sort of being a little more critical of my knitting as I'm doing it, and just sort of taking the time to think about what it is that I really want out of the garment, and whether I particularly enjoy all of the features in the pattern, or whether there might be edits or amendments that I might want to make. A lot of this really does come down to just wanting to knit more intentionally with less pressure, particularly kind of time pressure. Removing that element, I think, will allow a lot of these things to happen. So that is something that I would like to do. It is something I've already had thoughts on. I intend to knit the Step by Step cardigan by Florence Miller again this year. I knitted it not last year, the year before, and I really enjoyed the pattern. The garment was just not for me. I chose completely the wrong yarn. It was Ramagan Feeble, way too itchy for me. But for what I would like that garment to do in my wardrobe now, I would like to make a couple of edits. I think I would like to maybe use a half twisted rib instead of the kind of standard ribbing at the bottom, maybe a 2x2 rib. I think I'd like something quite wide and boxy that I can wear over lots of different items of clothing in my wardrobe. So that is an example of something that I am already thinking I might do a little bit differently this year. The next thing that I want more of is lace knitting. This is quite straightforward. I've discovered lace knitting this year, and it's actually really easy and it's really fun. And I'd like to use lace knitting techniques more in my knitting this year. Should we have a look at some of the patterns that I've got saved on Instagram? Blouse number 2 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. She's got a few items of clothing, a few designs with that stitch pattern. It looks really simple and straightforward, and I would definitely get lots of wear out of that in the summer. The Plume Cardi by Yety Knits. This is gorgeous. I do really want to knit this at some point. That's got what looks like quite a simple lace stitch repeat on the body. By LilyKateMakes, the Winnie top, I think it's called, and the Winnie sweater. They've got lace edges. I think it's picot, so it might be done with a crochet hook, I don't know. The Betty scarf by, I don't know how you say this, Milotté by Vic. I'll put the name in, I'll put it on screen actually, because I did such a bad job of that. There's so many things that I've got saved on here that I would absolutely love to make. And I think it's a skill that I've learned, so why not push the boat out a little bit? And then the last thing that I want more of in 2026 is wearable basics. Now, I love knitting with colour, and I like knitting things that look a little bit unusual and exciting, and they definitely have place in my wardrobe. However, I'm finding at the moment I have a lot of blouses and shirts that I wear to work, and I just don't have like a chunky, oversized cardigan that I can wear over them to keep warm. I find that I'm missing those real basic stockinette items in my wardrobe, and that's in part because my body has changed size and shape over the last couple of years, and that coincided with me kind of getting into knitting garments, and I just refuse to buy like basic knitwear pieces in a shop because I know that I can make them. However, that does mean I actually have to make them if I want them in my wardrobe. So things like the Step by Step cardigan that I've mentioned already, I intend to knit that in quite a neutral brown. I'll be able to wear that over all sorts of things. I have already got yarn in stash to knit the Monday sweater. That's something that I intend to cast on this year. Just those really basic jumpers and cardigans that I can wear over lots of different things, I can chuck on, and they're really versatile, and that I keep telling myself I'm not going to buy them in a store because I can knit it, and then not knitting it anyway. So I'm going to actually make sure I do that this time. That is everything I had to share with you. Those are my kind of ins and outs, or less and more, for 2026. I'd be really interested to know if you set any goals for yourself this year, if you do a make 9. I don't do a make 9. I find it too restrictive, but it's great for lots of people, I guess. I also don't knit that much, so I think if I set a make 9, that, like, I think I made 9 items last year, so that would be it, right, for my knitting. But let me know if you have any aims or goals for your knitting for the new year. Let me know if they are similar to mine, if they are different, and I will see you again shortly. Bye everybody.